Welcome to the Business Spotlight series. My name is Tanner O'Brien. I'm a senior partner here at Action Coach in Central Texas. Today I'm sitting down with my guest, Hugh Seaton, who is the CEO at The Link AI. Excited to be jumping in, having some conversation about the business, about entrepreneurship, about kind of your journey overall, Hugh. So I'm excited to have you here. I just want to say thank you first and foremost. Why don't we start with a little bit of background? Give us the high level view, maybe like 10,000 foot view of kind of what your background is, what's led you up into founding this company and becoming CEO here. Let's start with that, and then we'll dive into a little bit of what the business does thereafter.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me on. Um, I spent about 20 years of my career around the world doing marketing. So I was in China for a while, Taiwan, so on. And throughout it, have really been focused on making problem solvers better able to problem solve. Whether it was an ad agency, whether it was, believe it or not, I started my career at a Taiwanese steel factory where I was taking Japanese specifications and translating them into Chinese and doing a bunch of stuff like that. When I came back from China the last time in 2012, I started a business that was doing a number of things, and some of it was related to the construction industry. It was a little bit more e-learning than what we're doing today, but the point is, went well. We sold it, worked with the acquirer. I spent about 3 years at the Construction Specifications Institute. So what that means is, if you think about how buildings get built, there's the plans everyone knows about, but the details are in what we call the specs, and that's usually between 2,000 and 5,000 pages of not so easy to read text that often doesn't get the attention it needs. So what we do is use AI and a bunch of other things to make that more consumable. Now, how that relates to how I got here is we were building AI 10 years ago. The new wave of AI came, and I was like, wow, we have a basis to understand it and do things with it, but the new capabilities just open up all sorts of new functions and possibilities. So super excited about what we're doing now. I'm a nerd, an absolute nerd about things like this. So for me to be able to dive into something that really benefits from attention to detail and, again, nerding out on the details is just a ton of fun.
Oh, very cool. So background in some marketing stuff. It sounds like over the last 10 years doing some stuff within kind of the AI markets, things like that. I have to ask, with some background in marketing, what got you into marketing to begin with?
Dumb luck. So when I left that company in Taiwan, I went to Hong Kong, and I had two choices or two possibilities. One of them was with Swiss Bank, which became UBS, and the other one was with a big ad agency, and the ad agency hired me first. It really was that. And then in retrospect, I've thought a number of times, the bank might not have been so bad, but it really was that. And it wound up being, because of my language ability, and I was young and a guy with really low maintenance, I wound up getting sent all over Greater China to build stuff. So we would be doing interior refits, even though it was an ad agency. It really was a lot of interior construction, which again just really got me excited about the physical building of something, even if it was a big old brand.
Very cool. I love that. So I always like to just kind of set the stage for viewers, just kind of get context because I have the opportunity to chat with so many different types of businesses out there. And generally speaking, what is I'll call it current ownership structure look like? And I mean this by, do you have business partners?
Yeah.
Is this a bootstrap type thing? Have you brought on outside funding or investors? Kind of what has been that generalized path for starting this company specifically?
It's a great question. So we funded the first. I have a co-founder. I now have a third person who's functionally a co-founder, even though it came on a little bit later. We funded in the beginning by getting second jobs and working really, really hard. We had brought on about 300 grand, and we're in the middle of closing what will ultimately be a larger pre-seed round. So that's where we are as a business. Our timing was both good and bad in that we missed the easy money, but now we're not stuck with a valuation in a business that, frankly, construction is not easy. It's not like consumer or some other things where you can have that ramp that they're used to in Silicon Valley. So not needing to satisfy a high valuation and the growth trajectory that it would imply is helping us enormously. So yeah, the grind is still pretty grinding. It's better than it was last year. It's not. I don't think we're ever going to see 2021 again, and that's good because I think, well, we will. Let me rephrase. We will absolutely see that kind of froth again. We don't know when, we don't know why, but it'll happen again. But it'll be a while. So I think it's better to start a business in a trough than at a peak, and we certainly got that one right, whether we wanted to or not.
Oh man, I love that so much. How about kind of your role? So you've got title of CEO. What does that look like in the business today? Kind of what departments do you focus on the most? Kind of what hats do you get to wear in the business the vast majority of the time?
Yeah, it's interesting because our product is it crosses between the design side of construction and the field side. And I, through CSI, understand that the design side a little more. And my co-founder comes from the field. So in that he was a project manager at a number of big contractors. So both of us play a sort of product manager role. Me a little more on the technical side, because again, back to the nerd. But also ultimately we're selling to people that he was. So he's the voice of the customer. I'm more the voice of how you get it built. But I'm also the fundraiser. And very often it's interesting. I wind up driving inbound and driving the meetings, and he's fantastic at closing. So there's a lot of complementarity that make, and we're so small that it's appropriate that we're not too uptight about whose role is what. I mean, there are moments when we talk to each other about who's doing what, but right now the overlaps are a little bit more about skill than they are about what letters we put behind our name, which
Mm.
again I think is appropriate at our size and scale, where it's everyone's the chief cook and bottle washer. We're just different parts of the bottle washing process, and that happens over and over again in various components. When it comes to I've been around the business side. This is the second startup I've done, so some of the nuts and bolts is more me. I mean, ultimately, as a CEO, it's your job to make sure the numbers work and the I's are dotted and so on. So definitely, I get to do more of that. It's fine. Like all that stuff looks more daunting than it actually is. It's just doing your homework.
Especially if you've got that, analytical kind of mind and understanding how, all the details come together and maybe get a chance to kind of nerd out a little bit. That's definitely my comfort zone is kind of understanding how all the pieces fit together and making sure that they're kind of moving in the right path.
And a high tolerance for pain.
And high tolerance for pain, yes. So let's talk a little bit more about the business. I always like to, ask the general questions like, who does your business primarily serve? And kind of the way that I want to frame this up for the audience is if I'm in the audience and I'm watching this later on or I'm listening it to later on, how do I know that I'm a really good fit to work with y'all, or I might know somebody that I should refer over?
So there's about $2 trillion of construction in the United States right now, of which about a trillion is commercial and or industrial and other things. The numbers aren't quite right, but it's a good guide. So it's an enormous amount of activity. The people we focus on are the project managers and project teams that have to deal with specifications. Now, I mentioned they're long, they're not written to be read. This is not J.K. Rowling here. What happens is in the beginning of the project, of course, they go look at it. They have to understand what they're building. But during the process of building, what we help with is making it super accessible. We like to make the analogy, it's like old Rand McNally maps that are maybe in your granddad's car and you never look at, versus Google Maps, which if you're even a little unsure, you'll check. And that's the big change that we make. So the business is about risk reduction, which it's interesting. People look at construction from the outside and they see these charts about productivity. It's like, fair enough, but ultimately what most people care about is risk, because if you get it wrong, it wipes out any productivity gain. So we help people to understand the risk and also manage it and reduce it across the whole life cycle. So the folks that we talk to the most are, as I say, PMs, superintendents, and project engineers. That's kind of the three levels of a project. Ultimately, as the business becomes more sophisticated, we'll talk to the office more. But the main people to whom we add value are people running a project that's sophisticated enough or big enough that the specs are unwieldy. So if it's a $10 million job or it's an only interior of something small, we might not be necessary because the amount of specs, just you can handle it. But when it starts to get into the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 page range, we really help a lot. And then the next part of that is there's a lot of knowledge out in the industry. And what our system allows you to do is pair that with the spec and say, based on what we know about envelopes in construction of the outside of the building, based on what we know about that from this source or that source, we can marry the two together and start to say, you should watch out about this, this, or this, because based on what that specification says, this could be a risk. So a lot of it is taking advantage of this new wave of AI. We've spent a lot of time with this, tuning the system, making it work, but also making it so that you can really start to bring in the incredible amounts of knowledge that are in field teams right now, both so that they can do their own jobs better, but also so that they can start to pass it down to folks that are also on the team.
Very cool. And so at this point in time, are there many other competitors out there that are trying to build the something similar to what y'all are doing? Or what would you say kind of is the biggest competitor that you would face out there for those that might be interested in using the system?
Yeah, so we have a couple of components, and one of them there's a competitor that we're not going to name who it is, but they do one of the kind of low level things that we do. They've been around a little while. The truth is, right now, I'm more worried about I'm more worried about one of the big AI folks and how fast they move. So it's one of the reasons I mentioned a moment ago that one of our points of focus is to make it possible and actually attract and license outside content and outside information about how to execute. So we're not relying on the AI itself, because nobody at our stage is building their own AI, even if they say they are, they're not. Half the time when they say it's AI, it's another technology, but that's a whole other story. What we do is say, great, the engine might come from OpenAI or from Mistral or whoever, but what we're building around it is real IP and is really valuable. So I don't want to sidestep the question. The reality is specs are boring. They're not like drawings, which have been done to death, and they're really good. Like things out there to help you manage construction drawings are really, really good. Up the road, Procore is a great example of that. Specs have tended to get a little bit less love because it's data. I mean, not even data, it's long documents. So it doesn't protect us so much, but it does mean there are fewer folks out there paying attention to it. That's changing, like it always is. But right now we feel like we've got a lot of advantages, both from my relationship with CSI as well as just the things that we've done as a business to build a pretty high quality product.
Awesome. So I always love to ask you questions around marketing, and given you've got a little bit of background in marketing for your business, what have you found to be like the most effective when it comes to getting in front of that target market, getting in front of some of the project managers? What has worked, or has there been anything that you've tested that just hasn't really been a good fit for this type of industry? But what are some lessons you've learned along the way with regards to marketing?
Yeah, so let's take marketing in a couple of pieces. One of them is just awareness. And you need to be okay with boring people. You need to be okay with, if you're on LinkedIn, which for us is the best place to be, as opposed to Facebook or X/Twitter. You need to be okay with the fact that the usual suspects who you see a lot are going to see a lot of you. Otherwise, the real people you care about, who don't spend all their time thinking about software, are never going to see you. So you kind of have to overdo it, and that makes people uncomfortable. But that's a really old idea in marketing, is if you're trying to reach a really diffuse group that doesn't consume a lot of media, you need to flood them a little bit. So that's kind of point one. The other one, not really marketing, but the other tail of marketing is outbound and trying to reach people to make phone calls. Email works kind of. Nothing beats a phone call. Like at a time in American society when no one wants to make a phone call, construction is absolutely an exception. The phone, because these folks are usually on a site somewhere. They're usually on their own, calling all over. It's just so part of how they do their job that calling them is probably I don't want to say the only way, but it's by far the most effective way. So in our case, there isn't really good construction media. There's a couple of magazines that have some readership, but it's not like some other industries where, like Adweek from my old world, it was pretty reasonable to expect anyone you cared about in the advertising world probably either read it or someone would forward it to them, kind of thing. Not really true in construction. So you don't get to go. ENR is the Engineering News Record is probably the big one, and it's a good property, but it doesn't get you a lot of reach. So you got to do it some other way, and it's a blend of things. The other thing that's interesting is in person really matters. It matters everywhere, but it really matters here. There are a ton of conferences in construction. And what's interesting is the associations and unions are doing an amazing job. The Association of General Contractors is the one I'm thinking of on their own, as well as the Association of Building Contractors, ABC. So those are two that I'm mentioning, and I'm sure I'll piss off folks I'm not mentioning. But they all do a great job. You know, the Mechanical Contractors Association, the National Electrical Contractors Association. I am going to stop now, but they do a great job because the point is it is unequivocally about making their members and people that show up better at their jobs, as opposed to, you know, someone who does conferences for a living where they may charge a lot and they're not so worried about the experience of you know what I mean? Like they're not there to make the person who shows up better. They're there to make a buck. Because of that, the associations wind up just doing a really good job and wind up being a great way to go reach who you need to reach. But it is a grind. There's a lot of people, and none of these are 10 that well. One or two of them are kind of big, but most of them are nowhere near as big as you wish. So you got to get out there a lot.
Oh, it's fun to kind of hear the context of, you know, the general theme in marketing is you got to go find the prospects where they are, and knowing this industry and, you know, being able to articulate, well, they are on their phones a lot, so it makes sense to make a phone call, like they'll actually connect versus, you know, some other industries that may not be necessarily the case, and in person
Yep.
is still really important. Do you, outside of like conferences and things like that, have you found any really effective ways to be able to, you know, collect some information and be able to make some of these phone calls? Is it, you know, more kind of buying lists and that sort of thing? Is it warm databases you already have? What have you kind of found before you can like pick up the phone and make some of the calls? What's been the easiest way to kind of get them into that initial sphere of influence?
I have a massive LinkedIn following, primarily because I've just worked at it. So we use LinkedIn Sales Navigator as usually the beginning of a process that you do a bunch of stuff to get to. And that's enough.
Beautiful.
Like that gets us more people than we could reach.
That's amazing. I love just kind of the context and such behind it. So, how about for the next couple of years, as you continue to grow and build out the business, and kind of where do you see things going in the next 3 to 5 years, for the business specifically, and then kind of where do you see your role going? How does your role change as the business, you know, grows over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. So we are in a funny place. Everyone is in a funny place in that what is happening with AI is unlike anything I've ever seen. So I've been in technology marketing for almost 30 years and nothing is close to this. I was at Sony and we thought it was a big deal. Nothing like this. What that means is that, you know, we are not going to be anthropic and we're not going to be defining the engine, as I like to say, but the engines are changing super, super quick. We're going from stock cars to F1 to who knows what. So I see the next 3 years of a really careful and um, really thoughtful progression for what do we want this AI to be able to do, of the things that were being provided by the open AIs and the Googles of the world. What functions and capabilities make sense? What is the industry not ready for? You know, one of the points I made before about risk reduction and really a focus on risk means that some of the things we think AI might be able to do in terms of being an agent and automating things, people don't want you to automate too much. They don't mind if some of the drudgery is automated, but they definitely want to see it and also be able to make sure they've checked everything. Checking everything is such a part of this business. It's like the printing press, where like checking to make sure before you hit go, you know, because it's a building, like you don't get to do it again. So that's going to be a really interesting balance. My role will stay kind of like it is now, just more people helping out. You know, I will be sales guy number one for the next 2.5 years for sure, and also technology instigator for at least that long. Again, I happen to really love technology and spend a lot of time on it. The interesting thing that I often am doing is saying, we built this product. What about prompting better? Or what about integrating this better? So not really changing the code, but changing the use of it. That's never been a factor, not really, in software. It suddenly is. Like you don't have to write more code to make the underlying thing more useful. You can show people how to use it better or automate kind of some of the prompting and some of the questions. So there's a long road ahead of just figuring out how to make what we already have useful while the underlying, like every 2 months, they're doing something new. Like voice is now way more an issue than it, or way more a possibility than it was. Video isn't really what we do, but who knows? Maybe, you know, create a quick training video for how to do this inspection. I'm not sure I would trust an AI to do that, but that's today. Who knows in 18 months? So it's a balancing act between, as I say, what the capability is, but also really understanding the, you know, hallucinations were a thing. they're more or less solved. They're certainly solvable at this point. What's the next problem? What's the next risk that AI uniquely creates that we don't pass on to our users and our customers, but manage for them so they're still getting the benefits, or at least some of the benefits, without taking on a new risk that they don't really understand how to deal with. So that's going to be a lot, and it's fun. It's a great time to be in software. It's a great time to be thinking about how do we make construction better, faster, more efficient than it was, knowing as we do that it's a way harder problem than people from the outside of the industry usually think it is. It's just, there's so much complexity, there's so much interrelationships between things that you can't swoop in with great software and solve the problem. It's part of a way bigger set of solutions.
Mm. I'm curious on your thoughts with the technology moving at such the fast rate that it is. Does that cause it to be more difficult to kind of plan over a 2-3 year period, or given the fact that maybe human behavior and some things that people want doesn't necessarily go as fast as some of the technology does, that being able to have the technology go fast enough, you can kind of rein it back and say, well, here's the path forward because we know that human behavior is not going to go that fast. What's kind of your thought on that?
So great question, because I think human behavior is underestimated as a huge factor in here. But the other thing is, just because the software or the AI can do a thing doesn't make it useful. So one of the problems we often have in AI is it's really easy to do a demo. It's really hard to build a product. And I'll give you as an example. I distinctly remember in 2017, everyone thought we were going to have self-driving cars everywhere in 2019. Not so much, because it looked good in a demo when the number of variables was this big, but the world is, not quite unlimited, but a lot more. That's true here too. Just because OpenAI can do a thing that, for a consumer who doesn't care if it doesn't get it right, doesn't mean we're going to use it yet, which is one of the reasons why a lot of AI isn't really at the enterprise level yet. It's getting there this year as people have worked that out. So again, just because they've figured something out, and for like a marketing person to automate their social media posts, it doesn't matter if something gets missed or this, or it's just that the bar is lower. So a lot of what we're doing has legal ramifications. So specifications are actually part of a contract. So one of the things we do that really makes the difference is you can click on an answer and it'll show you where it came from. It'll show you the underlying legal document. That's just an example of how we make sure we're not creating new risk. So I think that we'll see what gets done. We'll see what gets produced. Like I mentioned a moment ago, wouldn't it be cool if I could point at it and say, hey, make me a training video? I would never trust it though. Like, it's just, the world doesn't work like that. And I think it's going to be a while before it does. So that user behavior is one thing, but the other thing is it even ready for us yet? Even though it can do something cool in a well-controlled environment, am I going to let it loose on a job site or with a group that doesn't have a lot of patience for things that get them in trouble? They're actually remarkable. I'll tell you, I find construction project teams are all looking for how to do it better, faster, more efficiently. All of them, all the time. These are people that often are finishing their work at 9 o'clock at night after the kids are in bed, and they'd love to not have to do that. Or they're up at 4 a.m. to drive to a job site. I mean, it's just all sorts of craziness. So for them, they all want that. But what they don't want is to find out 4 days later that the thing they thought was resolved is now a new thing for them to worry about. You know what I mean? So I think that's our job, is to really do the hard work of understanding how to corral whatever this new capability is so that it's helping and it is a net good. And it isn't even a net good. It is completely a good. There's no little thing that they're worried about. And that takes a minute.
That's some really good insight. I appreciate you kind of walking through that. Well, I know we've certainly covered a lot of ground in our conversation here. I want to shift us over to just a few rapid fire questions as we kind of start to round out the conversation. And for you, when you look back on kind of your journey through your career, through building this business, through previous business, et cetera, what would you say for you has been kind of your key to success?
Two things. One, high tolerance for pain. I know that sounds like, an Instagram headline, but things aren't easy. If they were easy, they'd be easy. It's okay to grind through it, and you just kind of got to know that it may suck right now, but you're going to get through it. And whatever the thing is, it's probably, things that suck are often worth doing. They're often, what is it they say? The Stoics say the obstacle is the way. So a lot of times there's no better way than going through the problem rather than avoiding it, whatever. And that's it. That operates on a lot of different levels. The other one, though, is being willing to take risks. Is that, you know, going from a corporate job, which I had for a long time, to running my own business, or, you know what, hanging up your own shingle, even as a solopreneur, is really, really different. And it's a lot more of a risk than people think it is. And it feels like more of a risk than it looks like from the outside. And I think, you know, anyone who's considering doing that, you got to give yourself 6 months to kind of really reset how you operate. And I went through that. It didn't take me only 6 months. So those are the two things I think. One of them is just embracing the obstacle and motoring through it. And the other one is just a tolerance for risk.
Hmm. How about advice? If you could give just one piece of advice to other entrepreneurs out there, whether they're in kind of the startup phase or kind of early phases of their business career, what piece of advice would you want to leave them today?
Balance being unreasonable with humility. And that's a tough one, but the, building a business is imposing your will on the world. It is saying, I'm going to reorganize some things the way I think they should be. And the way I reorganize them will generate value and money and everyone's happy. But the flip side of that unreasonableness is you need to be humble about things that you know don't interfere with your unreasonableness, if that makes sense. Listening is such a big part, and knowing the time to listen and not. A great example. Everyone used to say that both the founder of Sony and Steve Jobs never did focus groups. No, but they watched people all the time. Like it's one of these little misconceptions out there that they never did. They just went with their vision. That's absolutely not true. What they did was listen to people, but they just didn't do it. They didn't have an ad agency doing the listening for them. So that's that balance between unreasonableness and imposing your will on the world and actually listening is not so easy to get right. And you're going to get it wrong sometimes, but just being aware of it's a big deal.
I like that. It is a phenomenal piece of advice. One more rapid fire question, kind of wrap this piece out. What's one book that you would recommend for the audience? It could be something that you're currently reading, have you read recently? It does not have to be business related if you don't want to, but anything that you'd recommend for the audience.
Yeah, there's a phenomenal book. There's honestly anything good on philosophy that's not new. If it's written by current philosophers, it's impenetrable. It's like specs. But there's a guy named Will Durant who wrote a couple of really good books. There's one in particular called The Logic of Real Arguments. And it's just so good because it teaches you to break things apart and think more clearly. I got to that sort of thing in my 30s, and I wish it had been part of my undergrad. It wasn't. But that sort of thing helps everywhere. And it really helps you pick apart what people are saying. And it also helps with the contract, believe it or not, which as a CEO, you can't avoid reading contracts. It drives me nuts when people think they can get away without that, but you have to read it all. But the point anyway, the broader point is things that help you to think as a skill as opposed to what to think. Plenty of stuff out there about what to think, but how to think it's like any other muscle. There's no end to how much you should be, you know, building that muscle.
I love it. It's a new book I get to add onto my list because I don't think I've had that one
It's
come up
short
yet.
too. I love
Fantastic.
short books that don't like you're not signing up for 500 pages of misery.
I love it. It's fantastic. Well, for those that are watching that want a little bit more information, that want to connect with you, maybe follow you on LinkedIn, that sort of thing, where can we advise them to go for a little bit more information?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn all the time. I podcast and webinars and all that. So just check me out, Hugh Seaton. The link is the link.ai. Pretty easy. Those are the two places I hang out the most.
Beautiful. I will make sure to put all of that in the video description below. So for those that are watching, make sure you take a moment, go click the links, go check it all out. Send Hugh a direct message, say, hey, saw you in the business spotlight. Great conversation. Make sure you make some connections here. I think that's always one of the best things about this particular series. So Hugh, I always like to wrap out with one final question, and that is simply, what is most inspiring to you today?
I'll be honest, when I see people overcome struggle, I love that. Everything from a woman I once talked to who was talking about how in a previous relationship she'd always been overshadowed, and she was in the middle of discovering how to have her own voice, to sports where people overcome something and you know win, or what we do in the startup world all the time. But I love seeing people overcome something and you know win or succeed or get through it or whatever it is. Just the human ability to get through things and overcome, I think is just always inspiring. And I love seeing that.
That's fantastic. Hugh, I want to say thank you again. It's been a genuine pleasure. I'm certain we could probably sit here and go really deep on some additional things here, but for sharing a bit of your story here today and about what y'all are doing and up to, it's just been absolutely fantastic. And I want to say thank you again for taking the time.
Thanks for having me on. It's been an honor.